Hello, welcome to Nerd Variety. This is the last day before Halloween that we're recording, so happy Halloween. I am Hunter. Here we have Josh.
Hi, I'm terrified.
Yep. And other here we have Hannah.
Hi, I'm sleepy.
Yeah. Wait, I thought. Never mind.
What?
That's one of
But
the
I have
dwarves.
tea. It's gonna be okay.
One of the dwarves.
It's gonna be okay.
Okay. So, yeah, almost Halloween or way past Halloween, depending on when you're watching or listening to this. But for us, it's almost Halloween right now.
For some people, they think it's Christmas, but no, it's Halloween.
Yeah. So I'm gonna lose these. Yeah. So we've been talking horror all month, and now we will continue to do that. This is the culmination of all horror discussions.
Finish it.
Yes. And first thing that I want to talk about is, and it may be the only thing we talk about, but it's at least a starting point, if nothing else. Should horror be grouped in the same category as science fiction and fantasy? Because, a lot of times I always would have thought that those would be three distinctly separate categories, but so often I see sci-fi / fantasy as one genre and that has one section. And a lot of times in discussion, I tend to see horror grouped in with those as well. And I can see why, but before I get, on my whole rant thing that I always do, what do you guys think?
I think if we're going to go with, I don't know, I would definitely say that there's not a lot of similarities between horror and sci-fi, right? Especially when you think about some of the bigger sci-fi material out there, stuff like Star Trek, and Star Trek's the main one that comes to mind. That is actually like people who write sci-fi pay a lot of attention to the science going into what they're doing, and I just don't think horror is very scientifical.
What about Alien?
Yeah. What about Alien, Hannah?
What about
maybe, but
what about Dead Space?
Yeah.
I don't know about Dead Space.
Yeah, I know you don't. What about Frankenstein? What about zombies?
I don't think those are very scientifically sound.
Yeah. As we previously discussed, zombies nowadays are a result of a viral infection. So they are kind of scientifically based.
They're very biological in nature a lot of times. And again, Frankenstein, obviously a science experiment by a scientist. Well, Frankenstein's monster, not Frankenstein himself, but that's biology too. He was born, so
I don't know. I guess I maybe am even disagreeing with you guys on what classifies as horror.
And that is another good point to get into. So, what do you, Hannah, believe qualifies something to be considered horror?
I don't know. I feel like there's generally gonna be a supernatural element to it. I feel like is a not generally, but like that's definitely a very big category of horror. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Josh, what are your thoughts on this topic? You can even take a step back from where Hannah was at.
So the definition of horror. A lot of horror movies, TV shows, video games have an element of there's some kind of monster that's going to get you, or a human that's going to get you, or the elements that are going to get you. And it's usually revolves around the fear of dying or being hurt or losing control. And you can see that in a lot of, that's generally what we all want to experience when we go to watching a horror movie, TV show, or playing a video game.
Yeah. Well, so, and this is a bit early to throw this out here, but I'm just going to do it anyway. I've kind of been, the more I've been thinking about it lately, the more I think of horror being, and this is where you kind of have to draw a line and try to find the difference between these two. But I tend to think horror may even fit better as like a theme than a genre, if you understand that difference. Like horror, it's more an element that shows up in many genres, and I think should be itself maybe a meta genre.
I would disagree because I feel like genres are always intertwined with each other, and that's one of the things I was going to say about Alien. And I don't know if I've even seen all those movies.
They're good,
but wouldn't those mostly be classified as action?
Definitely not the first one. Not the first one.
And this is going back to the can you classify them together? And I think it's actually there. You can say something is purely horror, or something is like a mix. It's sci-fi horror or fantasy horror, because Alien would definitely go into the box of sci-fi horror because it's,
right. And I feel like horror is naturally going to lend itself well to being paired with sci-fi or fantasy or action.
Yeah.
Right. Or thriller, if it has more of like a psychological component, right? Not often going to be paired with romance or comedy.
Well,
but that doesn't make it less of a genre.
Then you can have a distinction between thriller, what you count as a thriller, and what you count as horror, as well.
Yeah, I don't know what the difference is.
I'm now dreading the idea of watching a horror romance.
I mean, you have elements of romance in a lot of horror stuff. Well, maybe not a lot. I don't actually watch a lot of horror. I'm familiar with more than I've seen, actually, but it's there. It shows up a good bit. Like, have you seen It or read It?
Yeah, I watched It.
There's romance in It.
It's just not purely a love story. I mean,
it's not purely, but no,
it's a horror film, but it has, of course, some characters are going to be, I love you too, I don't love you.
There's a whole love triangle thing, and then just some other straight up romance things going in there. But no, yeah, like I definitely feel like horror tends to, it more often than not, it feels like, as Hannah had said, there's like a supernatural element to it.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's really what brings it into the fantasy genre. Because that's where for me, I'm like, okay, so how is that different than fantasy? Like you have, and okay, so since I brought up It, that is where it gets really weird and hard to identify as well.
Yeah.
Because it's definitely horror. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah.
But it's also like kind of fantasy, kind of science fiction almost, because it has to do with like these alien creatures that like created this stuff and like came into the world, and then they're kind of fighting, there are these opposite forces, it being like the evil like alien entity thing, whatever. I can't keep track.
They kind of I was like, okay, cool, when I was watching It Chapter 2, where they was like the vague origin of it, and it was like, okay, it's been here forever. It came from the sky, and it's been doing this for millennia.
They even took out the space turtle thing in the new one.
Oh, but I really like the how it was more of a kind of cycle. It was still it was more of a mystery, psychological still a little fantasy more than the sci-fi, because I think it hit a little sci-fi at the very here and there, but it was mostly super kind of fantasy psychological horror.
Yeah. So again, there's a lot of magic, in a lot of horror stuff like that. And again, I don't remember for sure. It's really confusing, and I haven't entirely finished the book, so there may still be some stuff that I'm not in on yet, but it does get even weirder than the movies have dared go.
Have to let us know.
Yeah, but that's just one example. First of all, Stephen King tends to do a lot of that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
Also given that there's like the whole Stephen King connected universe. So not, talking about magic, also getting into not just the book / movie, but just the idea of The Shining and how that's a thing that kind of shows up a lot, where that's like kind of a form of magic or like psychic powers and stuff.
Yeah, definitely some supernatural fringe elements to it.
Yeah. So again, that's where I tend to try to say it feels a lot like fantasy as well.
Yeah,
like it's very similar.
And then with fantasy horror, you got your vampires and werewolves and ghosts.
Sometimes zombies. Yeah.
Sometimes zombies.
A lot of times when you get demons, you also get zombies kind of dragged along with them. I
see a lot of there's Evil Dead zombies and then there's Walking Dead zombies.
Yeah.
Evil Dead, those are your supernatural zombies, your deadites that are caused by someone opening a book made from human skin and reading from it aloud, which is the dumbest thing in the world.
And I want to actually kind of jump on that a little more, but let's hear from Hannah again. You've been kind of quiet.
I have been quiet.
Yeah, Hannah. Do you open the book made from human skin?
She opened the Necronomicon.
Oh, why'd you do that, Hannah?
Damn it, Hannah.
No, I was looking up the differences between science fiction and fantasy and horror and all that stuff.
All right, Hannah, this is a discussion about it.
I know.
We're not doing definition by...
Well, so I found something important. Thank you very much. In science fiction specifically, there's two different types. There's hard science fiction and soft science fiction. Hard science fiction is just very, very strongly based on evidence and actually frequently written by people who are familiar with the science, whereas soft science fiction is something that has a main plot but uses facts and sort of the sciences that scientists make fun of, like psychology and sociology and stuff like that, to make the plot seem more realistic. And they actually give WALL-E as an example, which I think is really interesting, because it's like it's post-apocalyptic of sorts, right? And it does have some basis in reality, right?
Yeah.
So, and it does say horror is, like, the definition is basically like you're trying to scare people.
Yeah.
So it does seem like that could be less of a genre. I mean, it is its own genre because there are definitely movies that are only designed to be horror, but I feel like it's also an element that you can slide into a lot of other stuff.
Yeah. And again, that's what I was trying to say when I was saying I think it works really well as like a theme.
Right. But I would still say it's its own genre in the same way that comedy is its own genre, right?
Yeah.
So you have comedy movies that are designed...
I would agree that could be applicable to comedy just as well.
And romance, right? You have movies that are specifically romance, and you have movies that have romance in them.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't feel like the fact that it is, slipped into other stuff means that it's not its own genre anymore.
Well, this is where
there's
a
lot of overlapping.
Yeah, this is where I would say
Yeah.
I would have to think about it more, but breaking down what's like a genre for something and what's like a subgenre or a meta genre, if you want to.
Right, and it's worthwhile thinking about, and it's compelling. And I would say that if you do want to call it a theme or a subgenre or whatever, there's going to be a lot more things that we currently consider genres that would fit into that category.
Yeah, I agree too.
And I feel like we might have to, go back to the ancient, like, what would it be? I guess like ancient Greek theater types, right? Which is like you have your tragedies and your comedies, and like what are the actual like plot points that you hit in those that to put them in certain genres. But I don't know if we want to get into all that.
Not today, at least.
Not this episode.
And I don't think they had horror as a genre back then, but
everything was pretty horrific. Probably.
They didn't really have a lot of genres.
Yeah, I think they gravitated toward like epics and comedies. Their definition of comedies.
They love their tragedies. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, woe is them.
But yeah, so if you guys are okay with it, I could declare this this specific part of the discussion maybe not done completely, but at least we've come to a consensus generally that it is a discussion that warrants inclusion of other topics that can be discussed at another time.
True, very true.
So settled.
My biggest question leading off of that then is, what is the difference between horror and a thriller?
Ooh.
That is a good question.
Yeah,
I don't really know. I guess. So for me, with that, I would say horror is made just to scare, whereas thrillers are usually more, I would say, suspenseful.
Yeah. So again, I'm just a nerd, and I looked it up. So for horror, it says it wants to create feelings of fear, dread, repulsion, and terror. And thriller says excitement, anxiety, tension, suspense, or fear.
And honestly, that's why I tend to prefer thrillers to horror, because to me, a lot of horror, especially like a lot of horror movies, they don't really stick to me because, especially a lot of modern ones, tend to stick to like jump scares, and there's a lot of like, I guess, gross out horror. Something's just kind of nasty. A lot of times I just think it's stupid, and
thrillers
excessive.
Tend to be deeper and more psychological.
Yeah.
And
whereas, that's what I enjoy about them.
Yeah. I don't know if I've seen a lot of thrillers, to be honest, though.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a lot of horror either, though, so.
Yeah. I'm thinking of I'm trying to think of a thriller. A lot of thrillers that I see usually involve like a serial killer that you don't really see as like, you don't see him ripping the victim apart or bathing in their blood. You just see them, oh, someone went missing, guys. Oh, well, let's go into this suspect's house and see if we can see anything. And then it's like, okay, we're inside the house, and oh crap, what was that? Oh crap, the dude's home. What do we do? Quick, you go distract him. So
and
is the person inside the house safer, or is the person outside talking to the supposed serial killer safer? So who's going to get got first?
Well, and that's where it comes to what makes it better, in my opinion, probably what makes it maybe a little more distinctive, is that in thrillers like that situation that you were talking about, or those situations, it's more about, that the threat's there, but you're given less and less information, and you don't really know anything for sure, and that's where it brings in the suspense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think I'm kind of in the middle of myself. I love a good thriller, any day of the week. Horror is something I'm kind of getting to slowly. I've never really been a big fan of it growing up. It was not my cup of tea. But now I'm like, why not? Let's see some, this person get, their spine ripped out, and you know.
Yeah. I
Why not?
am getting a little more and more into it as well, actually. Like, just when I realized, like, it's just fun, kind of mindless entertainment.
Yeah.
A lot of
Yeah.
times, like, so it was actually a few years ago. I didn't finish them, but I downloaded like all the Friday the 13th movies. And I watched a good bit of them. I watched like the first 4, I think.
Mhm.
And like, I enjoy them. I think they're fun. They're not
Yeah.
particularly scary or anything or deep, but they're just kind of fun, like popcorn
Yeah.
flicks. I also actually, I don't know that I've seen very many of them, but I always think I want to go and watch more not Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah. Yeah. The older ones. I'm probably going to watch Child's Play after we get done.
I always thought
just because I've
like,
never
the original
seen.
Child's Play was funny.
Yeah.
Funny.
Yeah. And then in the new one has Mark Hamill in it, and I also think it's interesting how they do the first one. Oh, he's a possessed doll, and the new one he's an AI. It kind of goes back to that whole like
I didn't know that.
horror fantasy, horror sci-fi, but let's not get into that.
Yeah.
The one thing that I've learned this Halloween season is I'm apparently just a very scared person.
Yeah. I learned that too.
Yeah.
I've always
and
done
then,
that.
I don't know how you knew that.
Do we need to bring up a picture of the marionette now?
It's one of those things that, like, when I was young, I never felt like I was like too scared in the moment when watching something scary, but I will like have trouble sleeping for weeks afterwards. Like, things
Kinda
really stick
internalize
with
it.
me.
Yeah.
I think I maybe just have an overactive imagination, and I live in a
Yeah.
basement, so
Probably. Yeah.
That does not help. That
doesn't
does not
help.
Doesn't-
Yeah,
Or
it's a
it
really
does,
creepy
depending on-
staircase.
Or it does help feed into that.
I mean, I don't have a lower basement that's like actually creepy.
Yeah.
So, but there are no windows down here, and it's very dark.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
and actually something that came into my mind as like a couple examples of thriller versus horror is like well, okay, there were a few examples I was thinking of, but let's start like It I would definitely consider more horror, because I feel like you see a lot of Pennywise and a lot of versions of him. Whereas the original Alien, I would consider probably more in line with thriller, because you really don't see the xenomorph that much. You see him occasionally, and he does do violent things.
Yes.
But he's pretty hidden, and it's very suspenseful for a lot of times, because there's a lot of shadows and there's a lot of darkness. And so when he does strike, it's, first of all, it's awesome.
Yeah.
But then it's also, you don't really know when he's going to do it, because they use him very sparingly. Not like Aliens, where there's a bunch of them and that's more action horror. But I would consider the first Alien at least more thriller horror.
Oh, okay.
The one thing that came to mind that I was like, it's kind of like a juxtaposition of all 4 sci-fi, fantasy, horror, thriller, I would say would be Doctor Who, actually.
Well, yeah. I mean, that I almost, like, maybe a little less with the fantasy. Fantasy seems a little further.
It definitely seems heaviest in like the sci-fi thriller categories, but definitely like kind of reaches into the other categories as well.
I think that's their main selling point, is that they are a sci-fi comedy fantasy show, but they can walk into the whole thriller horror parts, especially with the Weeping Angels.
Oh yeah.
But there are some episodes that like you would look at, and despite the time travel aspect of it, would be very much fantasy, right? So there's episodes about werewolves and vampires that like actually aren't werewolves and vampires, they're actually aliens.
Like, and that's why I was gonna say, like, I could almost see your point for fantasy, but I think they do too good of a job explaining it's not fantasy. By saying like, these are aliens.
But the more I think about it, the more I feel like fantasy is just like a core genre under which how do I say this? Fantasy is like an umbrella underneath which is, I would say, sci-fi, thriller, and horror. Because if you think about fantasy, it's just like something imaginative.
Yeah, and I've gone to that as well. That's been another train
And there's
of
a
thought.
specific like magic medieval fantasy, right? But there's also all this other stuff. I would say that kind of falls underneath it.
Yeah.
Mm.
I could definitely see that.
I don't think Josh agrees.
I also do see how science fiction and fantasy are pretty distinctive, which, again, going back to what I started off saying, I always think of those as two more distinct genres. Because, again, fantasy, it tends to lean more towards like magical, mystical kind of stuff. Science fiction just implies that it's fiction in relation to science. But yeah, so using science as a basis and then just talking fictional versions of that, which is why it is such a wide genre and why I think it should be considered a main genre instead of a subgenre. But we're not having this conversation today.
We kind of are.
Yeah, we kind of are. But yeah, I'm gonna.
So okay, can we agree then that maybe fantasy has horror and thriller underneath it, and sci-fi is separate?
I think of it as more as. I think of it as more of.
Horror is to fantasy as thriller is to sci-fi.
I am talking. I think of it as more of a. I don't know, maybe tagging a video or something, you know, like horror is a tag, but it's not a video. That was a terrible analogy as soon as I got further into it. But you know what I mean, right? Like you can apply horror underneath a lot of things. Yeah. I don't move it around, but I can see what you're saying. Well, I can see what you wrote.
That's just how like it stays organized in my brain that way.
And again, that's kind of what I was thinking, which is why they're all kind of interacting together. But yeah, so you guys got anything else? Again, trying to stay back on the horror topic.
Yeah. Just that I like how horror is kind of becoming a little more. There was a big boom back, I think, way back when, but they kind of didn't go into so much gore. Then there was a period in like I think it started in like the 80s. I feel like that it was, where they kind of went more gory, and they were not afraid to push the envelope and show people getting cut up and chewed up and all that. And then they also had they kept the thriller elements being kind of stayed along for the ride.
Yeah,
I feel like horror kind of maybe stemmed from thriller, or I think back in the day a lot of people couldn't handle horror, and then horror came out when they were like, let's see a little more death,
Well, I mean, you had those like in the 50s too, with like the
what was it, Psycho?
Well, that wasn't 50s. I think that was 60s.
Yeah.
Although I could be wrong. But I studied it, so I shouldn't be wrong. But no, and that's Psycho is definitely more of a thriller than it's definitely, I wouldn't consider it horror at all.
People probably thought it was horror. They probably screamed, "Oh, the horror!" when they saw her getting, dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, but you actually don't see her get killed. You never see her penetrated by a knife.
You see the shadow, don't you?
Not being penetrated. No.
I watched it like it's been. I've
studied this, and
can
this
you just
was
stop saying penetrated? It's making me uncomfortable.
Makes you uncomfortable.
It makes me uncomfortable.
Stabbed. I'm
who's
trying to remember.
I'm like, why don't we just say stabbed with a knife? We have to make it weird.
Okay, well, she was stabbed with a knife. But
she wasn't stabbed with a knife, and there wasn't a shadow.
Is it weird that it doesn't? Is it weird that it doesn't make the asexual uncomfortable?
That is, I don't know. I
don't
guess
know.
does it?
Anyways, um, yeah. So again, I mean, I think they were definitely two different genres, and eventually kind of came closer and closer together.
Or they've kind of been together, and then they kind of one started underneath it, then they kind of grew apart, and kind of like they kind of had they were kind of like individual in one thing, and then they became two different things, and they kind of switched.
Just sounds like a very complicated relationship.
Yeah.
They have an on again, off again.
On again, off again.
Yeah. So yeah, what are let's just get into some fun parts of this. I think it's all fun, but favorite horror. Let's go by categories. Favorite horror movie. Josh?
My favorite horror movie.
I'll give Hannah a second to think about it because she looks like she doesn't know.
I don't really have a favorite though. I mean, like I said, I'm still getting into the genre myself. I guess favorite horror movie.
Or right now, I guess helps.
Right now it's
franchise.
Well, I guess right now it's a tie between it and Evil Dead, because as in like, no, I can't forget Alien. It's kind of a three-way tie. Like those are my. If I had to recommend some horror movies to someone, I would say, you want Alien's a good one. Evil Dead if you really want to get crazy, and then It if you're looking for something, that's
scary.
Really scary. Yeah, if you just want to be scared. Evil Dead if you want to be disturbed. Alien if you are in for like a good just that whoa feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I was, and this may change plenty in the next 20 minutes or so, but my initial thought has to be Alien.
Yeah.
Because I've been talking about it this whole time.
Yes, you have.
And what about you, Hannah?
I'm having the opposite problem that Josh was having, which is I can't think of a lot.
You could also put Shaun of the Dead up there.
That was a good one.
Yeah.
Not necessarily horror, but it's horror comedy. I mean, if you go in that route, you can put Zombieland up there.
Yeah, you can.
Zombieland was good. I don't know.
Well, let's
any supernatural horror, like Interview with the Vampire is a
Carrie.
Carrie is a good one too.
Cujo.
I haven't seen.
I didn't like Cujo.
Yeah,
I know it's good, but I just don't.
There's a lot of choices.
I've only ever seen one horror movie in theaters.
And what was it?
The Woman in Black that had Daniel Radcliffe in it.
Oh,
okay,
yeah, good one.
Actually,
it was good. I enjoyed it a lot.
I've not seen it, but a coworker mentioned it today when I was talking about it.
You gotta watch it.
It was good.
I watched it at like 10 p.m. in my room alone, and I was terrified. I was
definitely expecting it to be a, purely jump scare sort of horror movie, and it actually had like a pretty decent plot.
Yeah. It wasn't
hokey.
Yeah. It was good. It was good. It was really
but
well
that's
done.
I think the only official horror movie I've seen, and definitely the only one I've seen in theaters. The other ones that are coming to mind would be as kind of ridiculous as it is, I do love Signs, if you could call that a horror movie.
Yeah, I think so.
I love that movie.
I was thinking Saw, but those aren't necessarily good. They're, in my opinion, they're bad.
I don't
fun
think
horror.
People like horror movies because they're good.
Yeah. There's some, but yeah.
It's not always.
But not always, no. Okay, what about favorite horror show? TV show? To me, I can't think of many, so my only answer is going to be The Walking Dead, probably.
Ash versus
iZombie, but
yeah, Ash versus Evil Dead. It's if you're looking for some just horror comedy and just in your face blood, gore, guts, insanity, then that's your That's a good one for you.
I actually just started that the other day and watched. I think only like the first episode, maybe the first two, but yeah, it looks fun. I've heard a lot more about it.
Yeah.
What about you, Hannah?
Well, I was gonna make fun of myself for being basic, but Hunter said The Walking Dead, so I think I'm good.
Yeah.
The scariest shows that I really liked are Doctor Who and Supernatural.
Supernatural is a good one. It's a little
I've not seen
Hey,
it.
It's not too scary.
It's not as wild, or they don't tear people limb from limb like you kind of like some horror fanatics would expect, but you still get a good bit of like a little bit of everything. You get your supernatural.
Yeah.
You know,
I would say it's less of a horror. I would say it's
use
less
your
of a
fantasy
horror,
yeah,
and more of like a thriller, like an action thriller, if you will.
Yeah.
Action thriller with a lot of horror
Yeah.
elements into it.
Yeah.
And I'd probably say I could make a case for Doctor Who, but I would not as strongly put it for horror. There are definitely episodes, and there are a good number of episodes that have horror elements to it, but it's just tough for me to really want to categorize as horror.
I haven't watched any Doctor Who in probably a couple months, and I still I imagine some of the monsters following me back from the bathroom when I get up in the middle of the night. Again, overactive imagination.
One that I do
stuck with me.
I do always think of when thinking of Doctor Who and horror is the one, I think they're on the moon or something, and there's like this giant fire demon somewhere.
Yeah.
They're somewhere, and it's
the one that I always think of is actually a relatively not that newer, kind of middle of the road, Matt Smith, I think, episode about a creature who never wants to be seen and is lives under your bed and grabs your ankles when you kick your feet off the bed in the middle of the night. Freaks me out so much.
Can I give a spoiler for that one? Can I give a spoiler for that one?
Sure, go for it. I'm good.
Wasn't that Amy?
No.
Because there was something, right, where she was under his bed when he was a child, and that was when she grabbed his ankle.
Yes, but that wasn't Amy, that was Clara.
Oh, it was one of them.
Clara.
You're right.
What
okay.
about which one's scarier? I just wanted to ask. Is it a monster, like a monstrous thing? I'm talking demon, vampire, werewolf, zombie, chupacabra, or is it a human? That
for me, it's always been a monster.
I think human, just because that's more realistic and it's easier to imagine that really happening. Depending on the monster, because there are some monstrous things that I just cannot. The biggest thing for me that I just cannot do, that creeps me out more than anything, is either excessive eyes or mouths with teeth instead of eyes. And I just cannot. That's
the biggest thing. The biggest thing for me is demons, because I actually believe they exist. So that freaks me out a lot.
The threat of ghost, because just kind of on the fence about do they exist, do they not, but the fact that you can't do anything to them.
Yeah.
And they can say as long as they want to.
Yeah.
And the scene in Doctor Strange where he's in the hands dimension, where there's hands and hands and hands.
Yeah, that was a little
stop.
But so all right, I wanted to get a little bit into favorite horror video game, but we kind of discussed that last week. So that was our episode. Happy Halloween. Thanks for joining us. Hope it's spooky. Hope you enjoyed these horror discussions, even if some of them were more loosely related than others. Josh, what are we talking about next week?
Next week, I want to talk about trilogies.
Okay.
That's very vague.
Yes. Well, there are trilogies trilogies are everywhere. There's, your movie trilogies, which I think we'll probably talk about the most, and video game trilogies. Can't really do that for TV shows.
And then there's song trilogies.
Well, if you guys want to talk about music trilogies, that's fine. But look, I think limiting it to movie and video games trilogies, do you keep it as a trilogy? Do you not? Do you make more after you make the trilogy, or just the ins and outs of that?
Yep, we'll get that next week then. So I just wanted to make a quick little, let's say, plug announcement. I'm doing a Twitch stream, and from now, what's today's date? The 29th. We'll call it the 29th is when people are hearing it. Until November 10th, 2019. For my stream, I will be streaming Destiny 2 to raise money for the Children's Hospital, specifically the one closest to me, Children's Hospital of Atlanta. So if you want to come by, that's Zab_gaming on twitch.tv. Find me there, or just if you want to donate, I think it's a good place to donate to. So just make your own donation. Or there will also, if you're watching on YouTube, there will be a link down below for you to donate. You donate. And
do it for the kids.
Yeah, I always think that's good. I had a whole thing, but never mind, I'm not gonna say that. Yeah, so it's good. So join us next week, and hope you have a great one. See you guys.
Later.